So it's peony season. So in this video, I thought I'd talk about everything I know about peonies, from growing them in containers, growing them in the border, propagating them, and how to even use them as a cut flower. So let's get into everything I know about growing peonies. Now, before I get into it, don't forget to visit my website. I have started putting my paintings back on there. I had a break from painting because I used to sell on eBay and it was absolutely traumatic. So I've gone back to selling art on my website. I've got a few on there at the moment and hopefully we'll have more later. But I also sell all the other stuff as well, the t-shirts and the books, etc. So go and take a look over at my website. All right, let's get on to the peonies. So the first thing I would say about buying peonies is if you buy those small ones, you can sometimes get them. And this one here that you're seeing now on screen was one of those. It was from the pound shop or Aldi or something like that. And it was just £1. And I put all my peonies in this border here were just £1. And there's this thing in cut flower land where you say, don't harvest your peonies until they're sort of 3 years old. And I think that probably also applies to herbaceous peonies. Just leave them alone until they're about 3 years old minimum. And that way they get a nice shape and they start to sort of bulk up the roots. And then you start to get a really nice amount of flowers on them. If you start messing around with them, trying to propagate them, trying to use them as cut flowers or anything like that before they're 3 years old, if you've bought a small one, assuming you've bought a small one, a budget one, then you kind of just mess with them. You'll just delay them being a beautiful plant and a showstopper plant. You'll just slow them down and they'll just sort of stay smaller and more pathetic with less flowers for longer. So leave them for 3 years to establish in the border minimum before you harvest any flowers or try to divide them or anything. Number 2, plant them in a sunny spot. They do like the sunshine. They will come up what is known as blind if they don't get enough sunshine. They just won't produce the flower buds and then you just won't get any. You'll just get a lot of foliage but no flowers. And on that note, if you plant them too close to other plants, if you don't give them space and room and airflow, a lot like a rose really, then they will also be impacted by competing shrubs and weeds or larger plants, and this will also impact them and make them come up blind, and they will grow these look like fat leaves like you can see here on the screen here. This one has been blocked by Sweet Rocket and Honesty, and that was my own fault. I let the Honesty and Sweet Rocket grow wild, and you can see it's impacted the peony, and the peony has overcompensated by growing larger leaves but has produced a lot less flower buds. So don't have them competing for resources. They like the sun and they like to be the showstopper, the main event and the main consumer of all the resources in the border. Number 3, they like water. So if you do have a dry spring, a lot like roses as well, if you have a dry spring or you're growing them in a container, make sure that you water them, preferably with distilled water or rainwater. If you have to use tap water, just leave it in a bucket for 24 hours before you water your peonies. If you have to water them with tap water because you've got a lot of peonies and faffing around with buckets of water waiting for 24 hours, then that's fine. You can do them with tap water. They will be okay. It's just not the preference. So remember to water them in dry spells, particularly before flowering. So particularly in that when they're coming out of dormancy, give them a good watering in dry spells, and especially if they're in a container. Number 4, when you're planting your peonies, that sort of root, that crown, it needs to be really almost at the surface of the soil. If you cover that over too deeply, then it will not flower. The peony will again come up blind. And the way you do this is you almost have it almost at the top. You just have a thin enough layer to hold it, to anchor it into the soil, but no more than that. And you can almost see it. You want to be able to almost feel it under a thin layer of soil when you rub your finger over it. And so even when you, say for instance, if you're enriching the border and you're adding compost or leaf mold or something like that, what happens is over time, that rootstock gets more and more covered in layers of compost and debris and decaying matter. And you might find that one year it just doesn't flower or doesn't flower as well. And it could be well be because there's been a build-up of debris over the crown. So if that happens, just go in sort of every autumn or every spring when it's about to start growing, coming out of dormancy, just go and make sure that it's not too deeply buried, that you haven't put extra compost on top by accident or something like that. Number 6, propagating peonies. Propagating peonies, I've seen a lot of misinformation on YouTube about propagating peonies. So 1, you can propagate peonies from seeds, but they won't come true. They're a hybridized plant, the ones we often put in our borders that we see in the garden centres or the shops. And so if you harvest those seeds and then you try to grow the peony yourself, it won't come true. So the most effective way of propagating a peony so that it comes true is by division. Now, again, this goes back to my earlier point about waiting till the plant is mature enough. You need to wait until the plant is a really decent size. So minimum 3 years if you've bought a very small peony before you can even think about propagating it by division in autumn. I will in autumn do a demonstration of that, but I'm obviously not going to do it now because my peonies are in flower. But the way you do it is you dig up the entire peony root after you've cut back the foliage in autumn when it's going into dormancy. You dig up the entire root. I'll show you my Shasta Daisy, basically one, where you divide it at the root. Okay, and you divide it into fairly big portions. You want to keep 3 to 5 eyes minimum on each root portion. Otherwise, again, you'll have too small a peony and it won't flower for a good 3 years again. So you don't want to keep having to wait for your peonies to flower every 3 years. So don't really consider dividing your peonies, propagating your peonies until they're a really decent size. Now, I see a lot on YouTube about doing propagating through cuttings. And because it's quite a woody stem, it's not actually very successful to propagate peonies from cuttings. Obviously, the established and most tried and tested successful way of getting free peonies is to divide it at the root in autumn when it's dormant. So you can forget about trying to propagate your peonies right now. If you're growing peonies in containers, then first of all, you need to know that when they get to a certain size, they don't really like to be in containers because, they do grow quite rapidly once they get going. They have that big root and they need space. So you can see my one in my container here. It's just not doing as well as the one in the borders, even though I've watered it a lot. So you do need to water it. You do need to feed it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's going to probably need to be moved because it will just grow too big. And the other thing is I found that in the container, it is more prone, I don't know why, to get more debris and compost on top. So I did definitely have to scrape back the soil from the crown, more compost or leaf matter from the crown of this one. Other plants self-seed on top of it and all that sort of stuff. So you just have to give it a little bit more care in a container, but you will find that your peonies do better in the border. All right, and then the final thing we'll talk about is cut flowers. So if you want to harvest your peony as a cut flower, you want to harvest it when the bud is squishy, so not fully open. I mean, obviously, if you're just going to bring it in the house, you can harvest it at any stage you like, but obviously the more open it is, the less amount of time it's going to flower indoors before the petals fall off. So you want to harvest it when it's kind of a bud. You have to be able to see the colour, so the colour of the petals showing through, and it mustn't be a tight ball. It has to have some give and squish. That way the petals are already unfurling inside the bud, even though it's still a nice round golf ball sized bud. And that's the kind of the ideal time for harvesting for a cut flower. And then one final tip, of course, if you're going to have them as a cut flower, is if you have a lot of peonies, you don't want to use them all in one go in your house, so you want to stagger the use of them. You can actually store harvested peonies, you can store them straight in the fridge for 6 weeks. You just put them in dry, not dried, but you harvest them. You don't put them in water. You just lay them in the fridge, maybe in some newspaper or brown craft paper. And then when you go to use them, you would just obviously put them in the vase of water, and then the warmth in the home and the water will stimulate them to open. But of course, by being able to hold them back for 6 weeks, you can extend the period of peony cut flowers long after even the peony has finished flowering. So that's it. They're my top tips. More or less everything I know about growing peonies. If you've got any questions, of course, you can and pop them in the comments. And if you found this video helpful, then don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, share with your friends, etc., because all that tells YouTube that you're enjoying my videos, and that encourages me to make more for you. So stay tuned, don't forget to subscribe, because I'm going to do one on propagating clematis hopefully this weekend. So I'll see you again soon. Bye.